One, two, three.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Lewis, and I'm glad to have you join us today for Powering Your Data Analysis using pivot tables. Today we're going to talk about a couple of interesting things about how you can use pivot tables so that you'll understand when to use them, how to create them, modify them, format them, add additional fields if you need to do so later, how to group numbers and dates, how to create filters and slicers, how to search the pivot table field list, how to create a simple pivot chart, and how to refresh the data as well as delete your pivot chart. So let's get started. First and foremost, it's important to understand what the benefits of using the pivot table are. And simply put, there's a lot of data out there and we're trying to marshal it all together in the easiest way that we can so we can make informed decisions. The pivot table allows you to do that by gathering your data and grouping it easily so you can select different components of the data and view them together in a way that allows you to make those types of quick and agile decisions for yourself or for your supervisor. So let's get started. One of the most important things that you want to remember when you're working with pivot tables is that you have to have a table that is complete. And by complete, I mean the titles on the columns must be there. So let's look at an example of a table that is not complete. If your table at the beginning actually has column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., then it is not actually complete. You would actually have to put in labels, and I just happen to have a couple of labels to add. Just in case you're not sure how to make a table, I would like to go over that really quickly. And I'm just going to highlight some data and create another table here. So in this scenario, I'm going to try to insert a row in here. And then I'm going to simply hit Shift and scoot over with my arrow and then scroll down to the bottom. And once you get to the very bottom of this, and there's a little bit of data, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, you will be able to go ahead and make the table. It just takes a little bit to scroll all the way down. Since we have so much data, we're just going to go ahead and do that for purposes of just showing the table. You saw I just hit table. You can also use some key codes. It's Alt, N, and T. If you use Alt, N, and T, and it's the Alt key, ALT, plus the N key, NT, it'll automatically highlight all of it. So you see it's got 4001 is the bottom row. And so if you click on OK, it's already made the entire table for you. So you don't have to scroll. So I think that's one of the most important things that I learned. So next, what we're going to do is actually make our pivot table. So you'll go to Insert, and you go to Pivot Tables, and they'll ask you some questions. Typically, I create a new worksheet. I do not use the existing worksheet. So I would recommend that just to keep what you have clean. And it'll actually make a little pivot table chart on the left and the pivot table fields here. So when you click, you'll actually be able to see what fields you drag. Okay, and I changed that a little bit so we could see it better. So you saw we weren't really seeing everything. So which I've selected is field selection, section, area, section, side by side, so that you can figure out what you want. And so what I am going to do is pick two things that I would like to see. So I have pre-selected some components that I thought were interesting to look at. And those are party and precinct. Okay, so that is going to give you what party voted and the sum of each precinct. So that's how many votes were in each precinct. But what if you wanted to count, let's see what I'm trying to think of a decision we can make. We could also count the precincts. Okay, so you see right here, it actually did sum of precinct, and we actually want to change that to count of precincts. So then it counts the number of precincts. So that's one of the changes you want to make here with the values. It will automatically try to add things. So usually I will use a count instead. So I could also add age group. And then I could add a count by age group. So basically you're just going to select different things that you would like analyzed, and that will give you the information. So one of the things I often do is go in here and let's see if I can figure this one out. Sort my fields so that these are all in alphabetical order. I'm going to get rid of age group and go back to this party right here. You can also go ahead and click there. Once you're actually in the pivot table, you'll be able to go ahead and find these analyze tools and design tools. So in here, you can select pivot chart, and it will actually give you a chart. So as you see right there, it gives you an actual chart indicating these same figures. And what I would often do is just, see if it'll let me do it this time. It's kind of particular. Move the chart to a new sheet, and it'll automatically label the sheet chart 1. This makes the chart a better size and allows you to go in and make some changes to it. So right here, amongst the changes you can do is add the data labels. So it's a little bit small for some reason. Let's see if we can get it a little bit bigger so you can see it. Oh, it's made itself small. Okay, there we go. Okay, it's because we have such a vast amount of data. So let's go to the bottom of it so you can see it a little better. You see 2157 right there, 550, 61, 41, the Green Party. Now you can also adjust some things here in the actual chart. So if you wanted to remove the Democratic Party, you would just click OK, and they're no longer in this. This is basically a filter that you could use. You could also remove the Green Party, and then you could go backwards and add them both back in, or hit select all. Now when you want to, you can go back to your actual pivot table, which is probably here, yes, okay. And then we're going to go ahead and look at some other functionality of what we can do. We can change the formatting on this. Right now, it's pretty plain, but you can select one of these formats. And there's a variety of formats from the plainest to the most colorful. I like this one. And again, every time you're trying to make a change in the pivot table in terms of formatting or look, you're going to want to be in the pivot table itself. Otherwise, you cannot bring up the Analyze or Design menu. Okay? Now, one of the things that you can do that we talked about is the slicers. So a slicer allows you to piece data into components. So it's going to give you all your fields. And what I usually do is check all of them. And then you'll get a big jumble of fields. Let me move them around so you can see them all. This is every different field or column of data that we had in the pivot table or in the actual table that we organized initially. What this allows you to do is pretty much create an active dashboard of sorts. So if you click on any single one of these, it will make a change. Now watch the data on the other end. And to undo changes, you want to just clear these filters. Okay, so right now, American Independent Party has 61, the precinct, right? But what if we only want the age group 18 to 20? So we have none. So I think that's interesting. So if your boss asked you, how many people aged 31 to 40 declined to give their party affiliation, you would click that and you know there are 98. and that's 98 of the 550 people. So you see how quickly you have that information? So it allows you to streamline looking for information. If somebody asks you how many people last voted in November of 2005, just click that, and it reduces your number of answers. So of the people that voted last in November 2005, 16 were American Independent Party, 166 declined to give their affiliation, etc. So you have 802 people total. And I think that is one of the great ways of doing this. The other thing that I like to do is take all of these, and you can move them by simply hitting your shift and clicking on each one of these. And then I hit Control X to cut them. And I create a new tab and I pop it in there. And I move these guys around and I get my chart. And I see if I can get my chart to copy. That's going to be the only bad part. It may not want to copy. Yeah, we're going to have to make another chart. Sometimes it's not as easy as it would seem. So we'll go ahead again and we'll click on the pivot table and click Insert Chart. Now once we get our chart this time, we're going to click on it and cut it out. And we're going to paste it right here. Okay. And then what I typically do is move these things around it. And basically it makes what's called a dashboard. And you may have heard of this before. Oops. I had to drag it out there. And you can make this even more beautiful with like more colors in between it and changing the formatting a little bit. But basically the goal of this is to make this where the chart will change based on the information that you select from the slicers. And it's just a matter of trying to make this look a little bit better so it doesn't look strange. All right, so let's say that we wanted just American Independent Party. So there you go. You've got your American Independent Party. And again, we don't have that data label anymore. So there you go, 11 people. And again, every time that you're wanting to get rid of that, you're going to click on that little X over here in the corner. It gets rid of the filter and you're back to where you were. But see, you had another filter active here. So you have to let go of that. So you always want to make sure that you don't have anything showing filtered. So right now, if they're all blue, you're good. But again, if you go ahead and make another change, you'll just have to watch that you go backwards and undo that. So if we wanted the age group 61 to 70, you see it went down. And again, for each one of these, you actually have to click. And this is where it's a little bit finite. Format data labels. Nope. Add data labels. And sometimes you have to click a couple of times to get the right click going so you see your add data labels. But there you go. And you have that. So green had none. So you have nothing going on there. Again, you want to undo that piece right there. Okay. Well, what if we have our original data? Let's see, what sheet was that on? Sheet 4, I believe. Nope, sheet 2. Okay. So let's say that we decide that we got some additional data in here. And we'll just create some additional data. And we'll make these guys Republicans. Now, you might think that this automatically updates, but it does not. So first things first, just so we can be sure we're seeing this change, what I would do is see how many Republicans we have. 1,191. Okay. Now, what you're going to do is click again. And you're going to hit refresh here. It should kick in. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, because we had two spreadsheets. So it may be that this is the one that we were using. So we'll do the same thing here. Since we had made two spreadsheets, it's difficult, and that's why you don't want to put too much information in anything. Okay. Oh, wait, that's another thing. Okay. So we can't use the same voter ID or it's going to throw it off. So if this is our beginning number, we're going to have to make this one 1011 and 1010. And then either way, it should refresh. And you can also hit F5 to refresh. But usually I just go ahead and do this. Okay, so we were right on the other one. It was the other one that has the data. Okay, so we're just going to go right here so you can see this. And this will give you we'll copy this. It realizes that we already have that number. And we have 1191. So let's see if it worked. 1193. There it goes. So yeah, so tip number one is always don't have two duplicate spreadsheets. Because see, what will happen is you'll get yourself a little bit confused, and that is never good. But see, we've added 2 to here. So now if we were just to do Republicans, then we'll just see them right there. Okay. Now, what if we wanted to change the fields? So when we're in here, let's see, we're going to go back into our analyze. Sometimes this little thing likes to hide. So if you can't find the field, you need to go to show and hit field list. And so there you go. Here's your fields again. Well, let's say that our boss no longer wants to do it by party or precinct. They want to do it by, get rid of the precinct. They want to do it by age group. And they want to get a count. So your counts always go in values. And again, you want to make sure it says count and not sum, because then it'll start doing all sorts of weird things. So right here, you would actually get a count by this. And then again, you would go in here and you would click on pivot chart, and it would give you a chart that you would want to move elsewhere, just because it's just easier to format it there. So you want to right click on your chart, move chart, and it gives you the option to move it to another location. And again, you will have to add data labels to these guys for you to be able to see them, because there's such variety in the numbers. You see, it's difficult for us to see them all at the same time, but it is giving us a count. So you've saved so much time in being able to pull this up so quickly. Again, I want to remind you that you do have, there we go, the filter right here, and you can sort it by alphabetical if it was an alphabetical type situation. You can also, in this box, this is searching by filters. You can search for different filters. Okay. So if I type 18 by 20, it's telling me there's the label of 18 by 20. So if I unselect that and just select that, it'll just give me the answer for those guys. And there you go, 2. Now, if I want to undo that, I have to go back here, and I have to clear the filters from age group. And there you go, you're back on the age group scenario. Now this is Office 365 version of Excel. So if yours is a little bit different, what I recommend doing is looking it up on YouTube based on your version if there's something that just doesn't seem to quite match. Pretty much they're all about at this point. If you had a very much older version, it may be a couple more steps to do the pivot table, but generally speaking, they're all just about here. I think this version has a couple of little extra things, and a lot of this is more for like importing data from other databases, like this relationships thing, or again, importing data from other databases, changing the data source. So those aren't necessarily things you would need unless you're pulling data from like some other system to put into Excel to analyze, which is possible, but that would require a lot more understanding of all the data sets and more comfort level. I would definitely work on being very comfortable with your pivot tables before I would go through that at all. The other thing I was wanting to mention is the formatting here within the charts themselves. So you see here, they've already got these charts pre-formatted in ways that you may want to use. You can also change the colors. Sometimes it'll be, there it goes. It's a little bit delayed, as you can see. And then there's different layouts here. So that might be an option. Often they don't always show like the legend. You'll see right here's a legend, that little box on the right. So if you want a legend, you'll want to pick one of these. And you can always change the chart type. So let's say you decide you didn't want a bar graph, you wanted or you don't want a column graph, you want a bar graph. It'll give you that. It'll give you a pie graph, but of course that would not be useful in that scenario. Give you a line graph. You're trying to plot a trend, that might be useful. If you had data from multiple years, that would probably be the way to go to get a trend line. And that's a little bit easier to see. And then you can always click on here and change what this says too. So right now it just says total. Obviously you're not going to want to call this chart total. So if you wanted to call it something like voter information for 2018, various precincts, you could do that. And then it'll bring up the formatting toolbar, and you could definitely make some changes to make this look a lot nicer. So as you can see, you can output a lot of information, answer a lot of questions pretty easily using the pivot. It's ultimately just a matter of practicing. And like I mentioned before, the way that I practiced was just going to Google and pulling up sample data. So I would sample Excel data. And you could just pick one of these. And you can even just, like on this data right here, you could just, if it doesn't actually, oh no, here it is. Here's the link to the data workbook. It'll ask you to open it, and then here you go. Here's the sample data workbook. So really easily, you don't have to make anything up, and you can easily come up with some information that you can use to practice. And so this one's like a whole workbook of information, like for sales orders. And all you have to do is remember to hit enable editing so that you can actually edit it. And it's popping back over here for whatever reason. And then you would do the same thing you did before. New workbook, rep, item number. You see Andrew sold binders and pens. Well, how many did he sell? He sold one binder. He sold 3 pencils. So you can see this is pretty quick in getting you an answer to some questions. A lot of them are decisions based on quantity, just because that's what this seems to have its strength in. But it can identify some patterns, especially if you have data that's multi-year data. Ultimately, that's really the benefit of this, is looking at this from a pattern standpoint. But everything we've done before, we can do again with this data. Simply check all the boxes, and you can see all the different types of information. And you can highlight all those boxes. Using your shift key, you can highlight every single one of those guys and take them. See, there's a lot of them. Take these to a different, oops. And sometimes you'll lose the highlight is the bad part, because there's so many of these guys. Whoops, I clicked on the wrong part. So be really careful to click right there. Yeah, make sure you have those crosshairs. That's like the most important thing in this, is to have those crosshairs visible, because if you don't, you won't actually catch. That's what's so hard about this. Catch all these guys. and they haven't added the option to just have these populate automatically on a new spreadsheet, they don't give you that choice. I think I just have one more. If I can get this to move. It's like a, okay, so we'll just Control X to cut all those guys and paste them in here. And then again, next time what we would do is kind of organize these. And as we organize them, we would put a chart in here so we could quickly see visually what changes we're making based on the filters that we apply. Again, this is just an advanced form of filtering, but it's easiest to see it if you actually have the chart piece. So what we'd want to do here is, again, click here to get the design, analyze, and then get our pivot chart. And then take our pivot chart that we would cut, move it to that tab that we have. Sheet 2, I believe it is. There we go. And here we go. We got this information. And now we can filter it out. And you see, here's the totals for Andrews. But again, all the formatting has to be done every time on these different charts. So you have to right click and add the data label so you can read this really well. And then you'll go in here and clear that. And then you can do GIL. See, every time you do that, you have to go ahead and add those labels. There you go. Now, the last piece that we want to talk about is how to delete the pivot table. So we'll go back to our actual pivot table on our original spreadsheet, not on our sample. And all you do is, I don't know if you've used this before, Control A selects everything. You just hit delete and it's gone. Now, this other information may still be there, yeah. And then we had another copy of it, but at least then you're able to delete it. Ultimately, I do recommend just making sure that you label each of these charts differently. So you can always rename a chart by right-clicking, and I would name it whatever it is. So age group chart. I only have so many characters, but you can also color code these things. Right-click and change to a different color. So you can color code your charts based on what it is that's in them. And again, you'd want to rename it trend line page. Okay, and you can do the same thing for the sheets themselves. So if we still had the pivot table data, you can do like 1 or something, depending on what it is you're actually trying to see. So you can, as you can see, it is not difficult to create a pivot table. It's not difficult to get answers. It's more of an exercise in practice and going through and kind of figuring out what you want to analyze, because that's really probably the biggest question of all. What do you want where? So again, the rows are going to be what it is you're really looking for. You can count them. You can look at the other values so you can see. You can see, and that's where it wouldn't necessarily be for most of what I would do, but you can do minimum and maximum of things. You can also do a sum. I usually use the count, honestly. That's probably the biggest thing I've used, but it's got standard deviation, variance. I guess it's variance partial maybe, or percentage. I'm not sure what RP is. So there's different things that you could potentially use. And you could also go in here and do your formatting of your numbers in case you only wanted to use one decimal place. You could make that formatting happen there under number format, and that would take care of how your values show up. So basically that's it for power pivoting. If you have any questions, please email me at jennifer.lewis, Lewis, @USM, University, Southern Mississippi. and I'm glad to answer questions. I also have some favorite YouTube channels that I'm glad to refer you to that go over it and give you kind of a breakdown on dashboards so that you can kind of see what other ways that you can use dashboards. But you may have seen these. The financial analysts tend to use something like this on a more complex level, but the same kind of idea to do their financial analysis dashboards that they kind of keep up on based on the Dow Jones and how the market's running. So you'll see those kind of move, but they have those tied into a data feed. So that's where that data piece that we talked about earlier in terms of importing data from other systems, and you see forecasting sheets, those components come into play as you go into a higher level of data analysis, which have not done to that degree, but I know it is definitely possible. But I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope it helps you give you some great skills as you move forward into 2019. Happy holidays.